we went around. I remember one night, my sole vocal contribution was going "Sexy Thing, You Sexy Thing," which didn't quite work when I sang it, I have to say. But had some great times with the guys in the band, and overheard one day the other sax player talking to the trumpet player, and he said, "What are you going to do?" The trumpet player said, "What are you going to do when this gig finishes?" Which obviously it was going to, because they were coming off the road. And he said, "Well, I'd quite like to go to Butlins. I can do a season at Butlins." And I just thought I'd rather do anything than do a season at Butlins. And quite bizarrely, at that moment in time, I started getting a lot of arranging work, because I'd done Hot Chocolate's arrangements, and a guy I knew in the record business said, "Can you write arrangements?" I said, "Yeah, I can," and the first record I did was a disco version of Hang On Sloopy by the Sandpipers, who had made Guantanamera, and this became a sort of club hit, and I was suddenly an arranger. So I found myself writing for records, writing for TV, and that's how I got into doing BBC drama and BBC Variety at a time when arrangers were still sort of quite important in the scheme of things. I started arranging for television and eventually composing for TV drama in a very strange roundabout way. Most of the arrangers who did BBC work at the time were ex-dance band guys who basically wanted to do, Tom Jones, Shirley Bassey, Two Ronnies, all the big variety things with the orchestras that were basically doing every show. What they didn't want to do was reggae, country and western, funk, anything that smacked of being modern pop music, which it was at the time. And being a young lad, I could do all, because of my family background, I could do all the sort of retro music that there was, and I could write big arrangements for Tom Jones or Shirley Bassey, but I could also do reggae and funk and country and whatever it was that they would turn down. So a lot of assignments came to me from people who came from Jamaica with a hit reggae record, or a funk band who had a #1 in the disco charts, or people like Telly Savalas and Don Williams, who would basically come over from the States with no music because they didn't carry it around with them. The arranger would have gone off after the session and they would never need the music again because they perform with their own bands. So I would take down from records and cassettes at the time basically everything that they were doing. And that way I got to work a lot as sort of musical associate. I started doing drama for other composers. I'd also become an arranger for composers like Elmer Bernstein and Rushi Sakamoto and Eric Serra. So I had a sort of a parallel career as an arranger-conductor for a lot of these people. And I started doing all the Miss Marple shows on BBC with Joan Hickson. So, and they're still shown today. So I think they're the most sold programme in television history, which is quite amazing. One thing I didn't mention was that I'd become friendly with Neil Innes through my friend Ollie Housel. And that way I started working with the Monty Python crew in 1973. We did a record called Matching Tie and Handkerchief. And somehow I became, by default, the go-to guy for the Pythons. So I wound up doing the Ruttles and Life of Brian and the Innes Book of Records and Eric the Viking and Terry Jones' Fairy Tales. And I'm delighted to say it's an association that I've maintained to this day. Probably what's most known will be the arrangements I did for the Ruttles and Always Look on the Bright Side of Life in Life of Brian, which came to me as a guitar sketch that Eric Idle had written. And it was my sort of decision to make it a sort of Busby Berkeley type spectacular. They had no ending for the film, and that became the ending of the film. And has obviously gone into sort of musical history now as the most popular song played at funerals in the United Kingdom, which is an accolade I'm not particularly proud of, but it has become a standard, and I'm very happy that, it's had the life it's had. And again, it just came out of an idea that I'd turned into this orchestration that everybody knows, and I've been very lucky because I've done 3 sequences in movies that everybody seems to know: the tank chasing Goldeneye, the finale of Life of Brian, and the ship sinking in Titanic, all of which I was responsible for, which is an interesting... You're lucky if you get 1, and I've got 3, so that's a nice achievement. It's always been interesting being associated with Monty Python, and I love it, because I was a fan, and then suddenly I was part of the inner circle. And one thing I do remember, which I thought was quite wonderful, I was asked to play at... They were going to have their 20th anniversary party, and I was going to go along as a guest, and Graham Chapman passed away, very sadly, of course, on the day that they were going to have this party. And the general theory was, trust him to go at a time when this is happening. But we had a memorial service for him on the day of the party at St. Bart's, where he studied. And this was the first time for many years that everybody had been together, and all the Pythons were there, apart from him, of course. People like Tim Brooke-Taylor, Bill Oddie, Graham Garden, Douglas Adams, Barry Cryer, various others were all present, as Jonathan Miller. I think Peter Cook may have been there, I'm not sure. Alan Bennett was certainly there. I mean, it's an incredible gathering. And we all met up on a Sunday afternoon at a pub in Smithfield Market, round the corner. And we all had to walk round to the theatre, to the St. Bart's, where we were having the memorial, which you can see on YouTube, because John Cleese made one of the funniest speeches I've ever heard at the memorial service. And I'm sat at the piano wearing a white sweater, so you can't miss me. And at a certain point after we'd had lunch, we all decided to make our way round to the theatre. So basically there's the entire Python team, the entire Goodies, the entire Beyond the Fringe team making their way round the corner. And we walked face to face with 2 tourists who had their camera, who hadn't seen a living soul, and suddenly were face to face with John Cleese and Michael Palin and Terry, the 2 Terrys, and all these comedy. And literally, it's the only time I've seen people's jaws dropping, because both of them stood there completely open-mouthed and didn't even sort of raise their camera or say, can we have a photo? They just stood there stock still, mouths open, with amazement as this sort of procession of comedians filed past. I'm sure to this day they have no idea what was going on and who these people were. Well, they knew who they were, but why they were there in the middle of a deserted market on a Sunday afternoon. But that was one of my happy memories, bittersweet memories. And the party was very good afterwards, but it was obvious that losing Graham had caused a pall over proceedings, The interesting thing is that there's a tale behind everything, I guess. For example, when we recorded It's Oh So Quiet with Bjork, the band who were on the record were booked from 10 till 1, 10 in the morning till lunchtime. And she showed up 10 minutes before 1 o'clock. by which time we'd rehearsed the song to death, had a break, and generally done everything that we could do. And those of you who know It's Oh So Quiet will know that it's very much driven by the vocals. So when she came in and said, "How's everything? How's everyone?" I said, "We lose the band in 10 minutes. And she said, "Oh, I thought we had them all day." And I said, No. They've all got to go. They've all got other sessions, other things to do. And she said, "Well, we better do it then." And she went into the vocal booth in the studio. And 4 minutes later, the song was finished. First take. She sang live. The band played live. And that's what you hear on the record. So anyone who asks me how long did that record take to make, the answer is, how long is the record? You know, it's quite incredible. With Tina Turner, I was at the premiere of Goldeneye in New York, and she was there because she sang the main song. Now, I'd done an arrangement of Wildest Dream for her and Barry White, but I'd never met her. She'd not come into the studio. So I went over to her. There was a lull in people sort of trying to talk to her. And I said, "Oh, you won't know me, but I did the arrangement of Wildest Dream for you." And she immediately said, "Oh, that's one of my favourite records. I love that record. I love the arrangement." And we started talking, and she said, "Did you do the arrangement for Goldeneye?" And I said, "No, because it was U2. It was nothing to do with me." And I then sort of said, I said, I could really do with a drink. And she said, "Yeah, me too. What would you like?" And I said, "Well, you think this is crazy, but I'd love a cup of tea." And she said, "Yeah, don't worry." And she went off and to the sort of, there was a cistern there, and she poured out the tea and got the milk and the sugar and put it on a tray and came back and said, "I made you a cup of tea." I was quite amazed. "Oh, Tina Turner's made me a cup of tea." Quite amazing. Moving on really from the days of hot chocolate, while I was still writing for the BBC, I'd become friendly with Van Morrison, and he asked me to become his arranger / musical director / sax player. And I did that for a year until I decided to come off the road, and I'd never been since on the road as such, not travelling from place to place gigging. But the writing sort of took over, and I disappeared into the studios, mainly through the 80s, doing a bit of playing with Slim Gaillard when he came to live in England, playing sax. But mainly, writing records, and I had a lot of hits. I arranged and produced Walking in the Air for Aled Jones. I arranged That Old Devil Called Love for Alison Moyet. I arranged Street Fighting Years album for Simple Minds. I hooked up with Trevor Horn, so I got to arrange for Rod Stewart. I did Diana Ross's Christmas album, Barry White and Tina Turner, George Michael's Kissing a Fool, which he rang me to do. As an interesting sideline, he had been sitting on the steps outside where we rehearsed with the band with Chaz Jankel and Pete Van Hook that I talked about earlier. And we rehearsed in the public house next door, George Michael's father's restaurant. And he used to sit and listen to us rehearsing, which is something he let slip when we recorded Kissing a Fool. He actually phoned me at home to see if I'd arranged that, and said to me, you're the only person who could do this track with me, which I thought was very nice. And I had a lot of admiration for him. And of course, Faith is an amazing album, and Kissing a Fool is a much loved track. So I was very proud to have been associated with that. At the same time, I was seen by Paul McCartney, who wanted me to sort of become his musical director, a George Martin figure, and I just figured it would be too much like hard work. It was pre-mobile phone and pre-internet, and I just thought, I can't keep going down to Sussex and coming back. at the time doing lots of record work and also doing lots of commercials, which I'd started doing. And that kept me really busy. And I also scored my first movie, which was a film called Act of Vengeance with Charles Bronson, where basically I was hired to arrange the songs, which were written by a very fine songwriter, but he didn't really know how to write music for film, and I did. So I got that gig. And after doing Act of Vengeance, I'd been an arranger on a few movies, like Just a Gigolo, the David Bowie film. But I was asked to write the score for a film called Hear My Song with Ned Beatty and David McCallum and Adrian Dunbar and Jimmy Nesbitt, directed by Peter Chelsom. It's a wonderful film. And I did something that, in retrospect, is probably what you didn't do when you scored movies, which was I wrote my main themes and then I reorchestrated them in about 6 different types of style, rather than choose a style for the film and stick with it. So the theme might recur in a sort of a synthesized arrangement or a hot club of France or an Irish band, or there are all sorts of ways. And inadvertently I'd sort of hit on a new way of scoring films, and this was sort of picked up, and I won the British Film Award, the Anti-Asquith Award, and was sort of headhunted by Hollywood and went out there and started scoring movies there. And for the next, I guess, 15, 16 years, I split my time between working here and working in LA, and got to do some really interesting movies in time, like Funny Bones and Little Voice, Beautiful Thing, Shall We Dance, Bargee on the Beach. Lots of interesting films that have also stood the test of time. You know, they weren't sort of flash in the pans for the 1990s that nobody bothers to watch anymore. They're always on, and they have a good critical response. And I'm very proud of the work I did in them. I also managed to score, as an arranger, films like The Sheltering Sky for Bertolucci and Leon, a very popular movie for Luc Besson. So I kept all these irons in the fire, but I wasn't really playing that much anymore. And I remember my uncle had said to me, "Have you stopped playing yet?" And I said, "Well, no." And he said, "Oh, you will." And I thought, well, I never want to do that. So I would do little jazz gigs when I had them. And I missed this sort of jamming mentality where you were playing, basically not playing sort of jazz as such, but playing sort of R&B and funk music and whatever. And I met a chap named Patrick Allen, who had been Michael Jackson's choreographer, who at the time was singing with the Drifters. And we spoke a lot about this. He had started a singers' night in LA and in New York and discovered sort of Tupac through that and various others. And I said, wouldn't it be great if we could have a spot like the old Speakeasy in the 60s, where not only musicians would go to jam, but you'd get sports people, actors, celebrities, whoever, coming, you know, to socialise, and you'd all be in one space. And he liked that idea, so we approached a club called the 10 Room, who had Monday nights available. And Monday night is always the dead night in nightclubs. Nobody goes out because the weekend's finished, and etc., etc. And we built it up by word of mouth into probably the hottest jamming venue in London, where basically people like Shaka Khan, Lionel Richie, Will Smith, Pharrell, John Legend, The Roots, all these people would come basically to unwind and jam. Nobody was ever paid for getting up, but people like R. Kelly would do a 40-minute set, or The Roots. So it became the go-to place, but also all the sports people would come along, all the actors would come along. Spike Lee would be a regular, Samuel L. Jackson, Orlando Bloom. It was just Will Smith came and performed, Leonardo DiCaprio would be there, Brad Pitt would be there, Justin Timberlake would come in. I mean, it was an incredible scene, ran for quite a while, for about 6 years. And the main beauty of it was no paparazzi for some reason. They never learnt about it because it was invitation only. Then we moved to a club in Piccadilly, and Prince came down 4 weeks in a row with his band, and that sort of put us on the map. And while at the 10 Room, we'd nurtured Amy Winehouse and various others, Joss Stone, Katie Melua. When we moved to the Big Isle, we were the sort of nurturing ground for Jessie J, who used to come every week, like Amy used to come down to the 10 Room. And Amy was very loyal. In fact, she picked up her whole band plus backing singers from the band at the 10 Room. And we stayed friends really right till the end, which was very, very sad, obviously. And we carried that on for a number of years, and I got to play with virtually everybody. And then the last few years, I sort of knocked back on it a bit. I still play, I still perform, I still write. I've just re-orchestrated, if you like, the movie The Italian Job with Michael Caine. And there's this whole new fad for doing films without the music. And I've re-orchestrated for smaller orchestra Quincy Jones's score for The Italian Job, and we just performed that a few nights ago. So I'm very much enjoying being an elder statesman now and being able to look back on this career that has been amazing for me, and that, you know, I've managed to get lots of awards as well, and lots of recognition. So it's been marvellous, and long may it continue, I hope.